From the headquarters of Telesur English in Quito, Ecuador, I am Estefania Bravo, and this is From the South. Today we start in the United States, where border agents have reopened the San Isidro border crossing after closing it for several hours on Sunday. On the same day, U.S. soldiers at the crossing fired tear gas and rubber bullets at members of the Central American migrant caravan, migrants who are desperately trying to enter the U.S. to escape violence and poverty in their home countries. The reopening of the crossing comes a day after the U.S. Border Patrol arrested 42 migrants who managed to cross into the United States. They were part of a group of about 500 mostly Honduran migrants who approached the border crossing. Most were driven back with tear gas, but some of them got through at a point where a small section of the wall was torn down. The outgoing Mexican government now says it is deporting 93 of the migrants involved in Sunday's confrontation. Our correspondent in Tijuana, Alina Duarte, brings us more a day after violence erupted there.
We are by the bridge that leads to the San Isidro border crossing. This is one of the busiest crossings on the border with Mexico. Hundreds of migrants have gathered here. They came from the shelter where more than 5,000 of them are now staying. The Mexican Federal Police have blocked their path. They want to let the U.S. government know that they are here to request asylum, even though their request could take months to process. It seems like this is as close to the border as they're going to get today. On their way here, they thanked the Mexican people and the city of Tijuana for the hospitality they have received, and they also asked for forgiveness for any inconvenience they might have caused. Nonetheless, they have repeated their intentions to try to reach the United States, or their intention to remain peacefully here in Mexico if they are given work. This seems to be the route being sought by the new government that will take office here in less than a week from now, with Andrés Manuel López Obrador as president. Many of these migrants have already been here in Tijuana for 2 weeks, and they're getting quite desperate because the U.S. authorities have not responded to their requests. Some of them want to get closer to the border, but as I said, the Mexican police are blocking their path.
We thank Alina for that report. And moving on, Sunday marked the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women. People all across the world took to the streets to demand an end to gender-based violence. In Mexico, marchers chanted slogans and carried pink crosses across Mexico City. Some of them dressed as brides in reference to intimate partner violence. According to the UN, 7 women are killed every day in Mexico. And in Quito, Ecuador, more than 10,000 people marched to raise awareness about the different forms of violence Ecuadorian women face on a daily basis. People of all ages and backgrounds gathered to protest domestic violence, sexual abuse, and to demand equal rights in the workplace.
We are here to resist because the government continues to be negligent with our lives, with our vulnerabilities. There are more than 1 million people missing. For the government, it doesn't matter that women are dying. The justice system does nothing, and sexual abuse keeps happening, which is just simply outrageous. This march is our way to say that we are fed up and we are a community fighting for our justice together, a feminist justice.
Marchers in Colombia condemned the rise of gender violence in recent years. According to the National Institute of Legal Medicine, murders committed against women have risen from 758 in 2017 to 796 so far in 2018. The main threat for Colombian women is violence within the family.
On a daily basis, women face a plethora of sexist microaggressions, usually more than just a single instance of harassment or one offhanded comment. They're often so common and normalized that women themselves often don't recognize them, and so subtle that men don't notice them happening.
In our work, women are often oppressed with phrases that diminish their ability. They are told they can't do certain tasks because they are women, or they are told they need to take care of their homes and therefore don't have time to work.
Language is one of the most powerful means through which sexism and gender discrimination perpetuated and reproduced. Yet, Sexist language is often overlooked and even accepted by both men and women.
In movements such as ours, we try to include women more often so they can learn about microaggressions, so they let go of the fear of speaking out, so they know they can do it. We teach them what options are available to them. This is a very difficult task, but we have been fighting this battle for years.
The threat of workplace violence also cannot be ignored. It can range from verbal abuse and threats to physical assaults and even homicide. Women who work in informal sectors are particularly susceptible to this type of abuse and exploitation. Many are also economically dependent on their families or intimate partners.
Over 60% of informal workers are women over 40. They have very little access to a normal job. Women over 35 are not wanted for most positions.
Then there's a persistent gender wage gap, where women in Colombia end up earning up to 14% less than their male counterparts. Additionally, women in the workforce occupy only 20% of managerial positions.
Women in Colombia, we have a higher education level than men, and yet we are not considered for many jobs.
Femicide is perhaps the most extreme form of gender-based violence. Colombia has recorded nearly 35,000, and impunity for femicide is routine because violence against women is viewed as a lesser issue. In the first half of 2018 alone, 400 women were murdered.
We have condemned all femicides and demand that the government gives us safety guarantees. There needs to be an anti-patriarchal justice system to defend women, not victimize them.
The statistics are alarming. 30 women social leaders have been murdered so far in the year. Those victims were in the forefront in the fight to build peaceful communities while promoting gender equality.
Bolivian President Evo Morales has established a special commission charged with tackling violence against women. Morales also introduced a new national service for women against the patriarchy, named after journalist and human rights activist Ana Maria Romero.
During colonial times and the Republic, indigenous people and women of all social classes were the most marginalized and discriminated groups in Bolivia. In our experience, and in my personal experience as well, it is important to end all measures that push aside our women, our sisters.
And the Dominican Republic also marked the day with a huge protest. In the capital, Santo Domingo, women gathered to protest against all forms of violence. Here, the date also honors the 3 Maribal sisters who were murdered by the dictatorship of Rafael Trujillo. The Caribbean has one of the highest rates of rape and intimate partner violence in the world. This performance from Trinidad and Tobago critiques the view that women are valued primarily for cooking, cleaning, and reproducing.
Was made to believe that woman was made for him.
Various protests also took place in Europe. The streets of Barcelona were filled with people protesting against gender-based violence.
A day of protest took place in Barcelona demanding an end to violence against women, especially institutional violence. Under the slogan, "Together we'll bring down the patriarchy," they marched in force.
We want to highlight that the entire public system is ruled by the patriarchy. The whole system is chauvinist. We must try and change things. That's why we want to rid ourselves of the patriarchy and to find a system that will allow us to live without violence.
Organizers of the demonstration are shocked at the sentences perpetrators have received. They view this as a breakdown in justice, all because women who suffered didn't resist.
The fact that abortion is still illegal is violence against women. Women who decide they don't want to be pregnant in countries where abortion is illegal are at risk of dying from backstreet procedures. And if they don't die, they can have very serious secondary effects.
We want to stop dealing with state interference over our own bodies. We need to have the power to decide. To be told what to do or not to do with our own bodies is a violent act.
The Clinic de Barcelona takes care of victims of gender-based abuse, and more than 90% of the victims are women. So the protest wasn't only an aid of putting an end to violence, but defend women's rights over their own bodies.
It concerns me that we must fight so hard to stop violence against women. There needs to be real equality on all topics.
Men also took part in the protest in solidarity with women. 44 women have died in Spain this year at the hands of their partners. Reports of violence have risen by 20% nationwide.
And just one day after people around the world raised their voices against gender violence, 3 men in Argentina accused of a rape and murder of a 16-year-old have walked away from those charges. The prosecutor failed to secure rape and murder convictions of the case. 2 of the accused received 8-year sentences, but only for drug possessions. Women's achievements have already begun mobilizing for a national strike. We'll be back very soon. Stay with us. Welcome back. Women in Guatemala are rejecting the government's discrimination against midwives at the state health system. More in this report.
Women have strongly criticized the case of a midwife who was forced to resign by a state health worker.
She says she was forced to sign a document stating that she won't assist in any childbirth. So I think it's the state's health system that keeps violating our rights as midwives.
The midwife in question is 78 years old, Maria Diego, who has more than 35 years of experience in the town of Ixcan.
No child I helped deliver has died. If I had any deaths on my hands, then I would have understood her behavior. But I have delivered thousands and thousands of children. Many of them are adults now.
The discriminated midwife says she was forced to resign because her work doesn't comply with the Western guidelines of the state's health system. But the Office of the Health System rejects this statement.
Midwives are important members of the health system because they are assisting nurses or doctors. They bring their patients to the hospital and inform the staff about their condition.
Midwives say this is just the latest of such incidents against their work. There are about 23,000 midwives working across the country, and they face a growing number of obstacles.
If we assist a home birth, the nurses write up a report to make us responsible for any complications like the death of the mother or the newborn. If anything happens, they send us to jail.
In May 2017, midwives also faced a setback from President Jimmy Morales when he abolished the National Day for the Dignity of Midwives held on May 19th.
The president of Uruguay is carefully studying an asylum request made by former Peruvian President Alan Garcia, who's accused of allegedly taking bribes from the Brazilian construction company Odebrecht.
We've gotten all the information necessary from the Peruvian government, including details of the investigation against him. We've also received the letters Mr. Garcia has written to me. We're studying all documents and will act according to the Caracas Treaty. We will take as much time as needed. There's never a due date set for receiving a political asylum seeker.
Buenos Aires is preparing for an intense week of demonstrations ahead of the G20 Leaders Summit, which will be held next Friday and Saturday. Almost all political parties, trade unions, social movements, and human rights organizations against President Macri plan to demonstrate against the current state of the country. Meanwhile, Security Minister Patricia Bullrich has unveiled a multi-million-dollar policing operation before the summit. Our correspondent in Buenos Aires, Edgardo Esteban, has more.
An intense week of demonstrations in Buenos Aires began this Monday in rejection of the G20 leaders' presence in the city next Friday and Saturday. Workers, social movements, and human rights organizations have walked from Buenos Aires' downtown area to the State House of Buenos Aires province and to that of Córdoba province as well, in rejection of the security operation and the murders of 2 social leaders. They are hoping to show the increase of repressive measures on the streets, as more than 22,000 policemen are expected to be part of the G20 leaders' security deployment, who will also play a role in trying to contain social mobilization against the G20 summit and Argentina's accord with IMF.
We thank Edgardo for that report. Argentina's worker unions are demanding justice after another one of their members was killed by police. The death of Marcos Jesus Soria has sparked protests in Buenos Aires. Police claim the young man was involved in an attempted robbery. However, the organization is strongly denying the version of the events. The group says Soria was brutally beaten in a field by 2 officers, and when he tried to escape, he was shot in the back. Brazilian Senator and Workers' Party President Gleisi Hoffmann has spoken out against the recent departure of thousands of Cuban doctors working in the country. She also criticized the incoming health minister for being against the More Doctors program.
The Cuban doctors were too kind to the Brazilian people. They assisted millions of Brazilians, mainly from the rural areas and indigenous districts, from areas where Brazilian doctors do not often go. The dismissal of the doctors will greatly affect these people. The incoming Minister of Health was against the arrival of the Cuban doctors. He symbolized their greatest opposition, and through his actions he demonstrated his disinterest in their presence within the country.
Meanwhile, other members of Congress in Brazil have expressed their gratitude to the Cuban doctors for their service.
The departure of 8,500 Cuban doctors has Brazilian lawmakers worried.
It's very serious because now we have 1,600 towns in Brazil without doctors, because the Cubans were the only doctors there. The attack by the future government of Bolsonaro against Cuba, which led the Cuban government to withdraw in order to protect their doctors and their people, is part of an ideological war.
The members of Congress offered their thanks to the Cuban medical teams at a meeting called to discuss the challenges posed by the election of Jair Bolsonaro. They say his government will be neoliberal and neo-fascist.
He is stirring up hatred and spreading disinformation. It's a big step backwards. So I think this is another cause we all need to struggle for in the coming period, to defend these doctors and fight for the program to be restarted.
Jair Bolsonaro made disparaging comments about the Cuban doctors and demanded they undergo tests to evaluate their professional ability, even though they've already treated 113 million patients in 3,600 Brazilian municipalities and are present in 67 countries through the Pan American Health Organization.
Their professional skills are at least as good as Brazilian doctors, so this was a humiliation, a way of getting rid of them, and now these communities are left abandoned.
In the middle of the transition to the Bolsonaro government, Brazil is losing 8,500 Cuban doctors, and there's no one to replace them in the favelas and remote rural regions where Brazilian doctors refuse to work.
We'll be back very soon. Stay with us. Welcome back. Tunisian social and labor organizations have called for protests against Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman's upcoming visit to the country. The activists plan demonstrations in front of the presidential palace in Carthage. This is Prince Mohammed's first trip abroad after he was accused of ordering the murder of journalist Jamal Khashoggi.
It is a danger to the democratic transition, because in a country, Tunisia, which wants and is moving towards democracy, which wants to create a democratic society, we cannot accept to receive or welcome a dubious crown prince.
United States President Donald Trump has dismissed findings in an environmental report by his own government, which warned of massive job losses if there's no reduction in carbon emissions.
Yeah, I don't believe it. You don't believe it? No, I don't believe it. And here's the other thing. You're going to have China and Japan and all of Asia and all of these other countries, you know, addresses our country. Right now we're at the cleanest we've ever been, and that's very important to me. But if we're clean, but every other place on earth is dirty, that's not so good.
Britain's Labour Party leader Jeremy Corbyn has asked members of Parliament to reject Prime Minister Theresa May's Brexit deal because it does not address the economic deprivation many are facing in the UK.
Many people from areas that voted leave feel this deal has betrayed the Brexit they voted for. It does not take back control, it will not make them better off, and it will not solve the economic deprivation that affects far too many communities and towns and cities across this country. This deal is not a plan for Britain's future. So, for the good of the nation, the House has very little choice but to reject this deal.
Ukraine's President Petro Poroshenko has signed a decree to introduce martial law for 60 days, although it needs parliamentary approval to come into force. The decision comes a day after a naval confrontation between Russia and Ukraine, which escalated tensions between the two countries. Parliament is expected to debate the decree later on Monday. Some measures outlined in the decree provide for mobilizing reserve forces, organizing air defense, enhancing cybersecurity measures, and maintaining public order. Flash floods in Iraq have killed over 20 people. Here's more on that and other stories from around the world.
At least 21 people have been killed and 180 injured after flash floods struck in northern Iraq. 2 days of heavy rainfall caused flooding, leading to thousands of people being displaced. Residents were seen fleeing on foot with their belongings. Many roads have been damaged and vehicles stranded. 3 U.S. citizens suspected of economic crimes have been barred from leaving China. The Chinese-born mother and 2 of her children were reportedly prevented from leaving after they arrived in June. According to the children, the move is to force their father, a former executive at a Chinese state-owned bank, to return and face criminal charges. The family in China hasn't been charged.
As we understand it from the relevant authorities, these people you have mentioned all have legal and valid identity documents as Chinese citizens. They are suspected of having committed economic crimes and have been restricted from leaving China by Chinese police in accordance with the law.
Around 32 people have been injured when Israeli border forces fired and tear-gassed protesters in support of the flotilla at the Gaza Strip. Freedom Ship 17 set sail from the port of Gaza to try and break the Israeli siege. Palestinians were treated from tear gas inhalation. The organizers of the march say that they will continue until their goals are achieved.
And finally, after a 7-month journey and over 500 million kilometers traveled across space, NASA's InSight spacecraft has finally landed on Mars. InSight will now be beginning its 2-year mission studying seismic movements and underground temperatures on Mars, something that has never been measured anywhere but on the Earth. NASA currently has the rovers Curiosity and Opportunity on Mars, but the latter hasn't sent any signal back to Earth for almost 6 months now, most likely due to a dust storm which prevented it from recharging its solar-powered batteries.
So we've been doing the design.
And with that story, we've come to the end of this news brief. These and other stories, as always, find them on our website at telesurenglish.net. And also join us on social media, on Facebook, on Twitter, and on Instagram. For Telesur English, I am Estefania Bravo. Thank you for watching.